Good afternoon to all the Film Independent members and guests out there in the virtual world, out there on Zoom. Thanks for joining us for this online virtual edition of Film Independent Presents. My name is Cooper Hopkins. I have worked at Film Independent for a long time, and I'm very excited because today we have a very special Q&A, unlike really any we've done before. And I'm going to introduce the guests we have here in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to thank a few important folks that help support our series. First, I want to thank the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. They've supported Film Independent Presents for a long, long time, and a number of our other programs as well. So thank you to them. And thanks to Vision Media. Vision Media is our partner who helps host the screenings that our members enjoy now on a really regular basis. We have a pretty robust event calendar these days. To check that out, definitely go to filmindependent.org/events. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with that URL. And last but not least, I want to thank the Los Angeles Times, our media partner. So with those introductions and thank yous out of the way, let's say hello to the filmmakers behind The Social Dilemma, which is on Netflix right now, the director of The Social Dilemma, Jeff Orlowski. And we got to do like a little, let's all clap in our living rooms for Jeff.
Hello, hello, hello.
And now let's do the same for the producer of The Social Dilemma, Larissa Rhodes. Welcome, you guys. Thanks so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Cooper. You're making me, I want to bring my own laugh track now. I'm just going to bring an applause track, a laugh track, and just like cue it up for a virtual talk.
You know, you signed on for this thinking we were going to talk about your documentary. It's really, I'm going to do a lot of bits, a lot of gags.
Perfect.
So.
On Zoom protocols. Awesome.
Right. Right. So, okay, let's jump in. And to me, in my mind, this is the beginning, at least of where this project sort of was born. And I'd love to hear first how you two came together and became collaborators at the outset of what eventually became The Social Dilemma.
Totally. Larissa and I actually have been working together for over a decade now. When I was working on my first feature, Chasing Ice, we had gotten introduced to each other through some mutual friends and one of the producers on that project. And I had some small commercial gigs. They were big at the time, I guess. They were like these big little commercial spots that was how I was paying the bills at the time. And Larissa came on to produce them. And that really just kickstarted a long working relationship now. And she came on to Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral and The Social Dilemma. And so it's been this creative partnership that has spanned many, many projects.
Yeah, it's been a really fun journey to go from making what, as Jeff said, they were a really big deal commercial-wise when we were first doing them. But looking at this production, very small in comparison. So I think we've come a long way.
Yeah. Ironically, those were for an app at the time, and we learned how to film like moving iPads and doing overlays, and it's like so much of the same practices and techniques that have been needed in The Social Dilemma, except from a completely different era and style. Mm-hmm.
A glimpse of the future before you even realized it. That's
great. We were just practicing. We knew it was coming.
I love it. I love it. And one thing I forgot to mention, I do want to let the folks who are watching know, if anyone out there has questions, just look at the bottom of your Zoom screen there and click on that Q&A button. We'll be having this ongoing chat for a little while, and then certainly would love to ask any questions that you have of Jeff and Larissa. So feel free to share those. Now let's get into the scary stuff, because you certainly scared the you-know-what out of me. I've seen the film a couple of times, but let me share an anecdote that my sister told me about. My sister Phoebe, up in Seattle, has deleted Facebook, the app, from her phone. So at the beck and call of some of your subjects, she listened and took action.
Wow.
And interestingly, the reason why I bring this up, once the app was gone, she started receiving text messages from Facebook asking her to come back.
Yes.
So let me put this to you.
Well, yeah.
Have there been things like that you've heard from people on the crew, your family, yourself?
Okay, so
what's your relationship?
What your sister experienced is called the resurrection algorithm, which is a very intentional and literally programmed thing where if you are a user that then stops using, they consider you dead to them and they need to resurrect you back to the platform.
Right.
It was this experience for me that, having learned about this, and then after stopping to use social media, so 2 years ago in the middle of production, I stopped all social media usage, and I saw the resurrection algorithm in effect. Emails, text messages, consistent text messages, different names, different people. Here's a photo that somebody posted. Here's a, a blah, 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 like all of this stuff. So there's a whole, I've got a collection. I renamed the phone number Facebook Resurrection. So that was a particular one that I was getting at the time. And every time I would just get these pings on a regular basis while making the movie. So what your sister experienced is nothing out of the ordinary. It is very, very intentional, very designed. And for me, it was part of the reflection that these platforms don't have our best interests at heart, right? It's not designed to make you feel more fulfilled in life. It was really just to get you to come back to the platform to see more ads so they make more money. And that was really not an uncommon thing that your sister is experiencing.
It's fascinating. And it actually reminds me, I believe, now tell me if I'm wrong, is the word resurrection used in the film by Vincent Cartwright?
Yes. Right. Yeah. So we planted that. It's awesome that you picked up on that, because we actually had so many times in the movie, literally a Facebook employee explaining that, yeah, we call them resurrections, and yeah, that's what we do. And it just sort of detracted a little bit, didn't really seem to click. So we left this little Easter egg around using that specific word in the movie without hitting the whole point. But that's why it's in there, because this is actually what they call it internally at the companies.
And they've even hacked the psychology. So they've tried to figure out, okay, well, if a text message or an email won't get you to come back, they're going to put up 5 pictures of your friends, and it say, oh, Jeff is going to miss you if you leave. And now I'm drawn into, so it really is at such a deep level trying to figure out what works on you to get you to say, well, I don't want Jeff to feel bad that I'm leaving the platform, when in fact Jeff doesn't care or doesn't know that I'm trying to leave the platform.
Wow. Yeah, it's, I found it so harrowing, I think is the right word, to know that, and and we'll get into this in a moment. You have so many, let's just call them what they are, just genius subjects who are at the top of their field, and luckily are thinking about ethical matters, which is not, can't be said for everyone in the tech world. But Larissa, let me ask you first specifically, we just mentioned Vincent, and you have a really great group of actors in this film. Did you know at the outset, when you're coming on as producer, hey, not only am I going to be producing a documentary, but I'm going to be weaving in some narrative elements too? Or did Jeff spring that on you? How did those kind of creative elements come together?
It was certainly a challenging production, interweaving them. And I think Jeff from the very beginning recognized that this was an issue that is very much invisible. It is things that are happening on the other side of your phone. And so trying to figure out, well, how do we visualize it beyond just interviews? And so in addition to trying to make the interviews, more kinetic, being able to have multiple angles to through, I think he always had a vision of, we need something else. But it definitely didn't start with a narrative script. I think the original idea was much more looking at something like The Big Short and thinking, how could we do that in the reverse? Because they're able to talk about subprime mortgages and get people to care and laugh. And I thought, well, how do we do that with algorithms? And I think it was very much trying to figure that out through the process. But it was, I think, about a year, Jeff, before we actually had a script or an idea of actually making it a narrative through line as opposed to just sort of interstitials.
Yeah, Cooper, I was going to say, I feel like we're all surprised by the process. Like, even when I was like, damn, we have to do this idea. I remember there was a moment when I was sitting on a plane to go meet up with some of our subjects, and the idea really started crystallizing, because as Larissa said, we had this notion of vignettes and like, how could we do it? And we were really trying to experiment with that. And then the idea sort of crystallized that this could all be one continuous narrative story that accomplishes all these different things. It accomplishes the kind of the anthropomorphizing of the algorithm. It accomplishes seeing it in people in real life. It gives you something to latch on to. Hopefully, maybe for the non-documentary audience, it might resonate in a different way, because maybe the average person that's on social media isn't used to watching documentaries of a lot of information. So we were thinking through, what are the creative ways? And when all of these sort of ideas gelled into one, then we were at a point where it's like, well, we need to do this. Like, I can't picture making the film any other way now. And all of these challenges are going to be real, but we felt like we were up to the challenge and the fun of it.
And the amazing team and cast, like you said, Cooper,
Phenomenal.
really such a Herculean effort.
Yeah. I mean, to pull that off, to be able to weave those things together, and again, with a traditional or more traditional documentary element too, of some animation sequences, right, that help tell the story in a visual way. I think you guys found a really good sweet spot in the amount of time devoted to each of those pieces and traditional interviews. You know, as filmmakers, now we talked about this right before we started this little broadcast.
Right.
We were talking about your backgrounds. You know, as filmmakers, documentarians, you know, okay, hey, we're going to need some specific visuals that are going to help us tell our story and get our message across. Just tell me a little bit about, like Larissa, we said about your background. You have this specific brand new emoji set that's built out by graphic designers and a team. Tell me about this piece of it, because I don't think it's talked about enough. And it's such a huge part of what documentaries are and can be.
I mean, it was really exciting for us to try to think through how we would weave these stories together. And I think we had an opportunity to try to use every sort of creative juice that was available, from everything from the VFX, which the VFX team, I have to give them huge props. They did such an incredible job. They were able to create, like you said, not only their own kind of graphic emojis, because it was cheaper for us to do that than to try to license other ones, to be honest. But in that creativity, I think it unleashed just an entire world that we got to build. And I think that was the first time we were trying to envision what happens on the other side of your phone, and how does it try to hook you and orchestrate, and how is it puppeteering you from the moment you wake up to all the way through your bathroom call to, you know, whatever else happens through your day. And I think it was just really kind of a fun process, and also I think extremely challenging. And the team had just an unreal timeline, because this issue was so current. Everything was unfolding as we were filming, wanting to try to keep the eye on the meta story. There were news stories constantly breaking about what was happening at each one of these companies, but really trying to think through, what is the big picture, what is the meta story, and how do we make sure that we're able to communicate that in a way that it's not only, you know, interesting, but hopefully that it gets people to walk away with a new perspective on their technology.
Right. One of your primary subjects, Tristan, right? Harris, I believe. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I had trouble as I was preparing to meet and chat with you guys about this. He makes so many revelatory statements in such a simple way that's so easily digestible.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that has stood out to me is his bicycle analogy.
Yes.
He talks about a bicycle. Nobody started freaking out in the world when we had, you know, bikes to get around town, and because it's a tool, right? As opposed to what a lot of things on here have become. You know, is Instagram a tool? Is Twitter a tool? Is Facebook a tool? I mean, I love that he's raising that question, and certainly his opinion, and I believe your opinion as filmmakers, is made clear in the film. Tell me about how your personal opinions changed, even just during the making of the film, because I'm sure hearing these insights from your subjects must have been revelatory, not just to us as an audience, but to you too as filmmakers.
Right. I mean, I think that was one of the biggest challenges for us, was that we were sitting on so many brilliant ideas throughout the entire making of the movie, powerful analogies, and it was really, some of the earliest cuts was just like, you know, 3 hours of brilliant ideas, and it becomes overwhelming when you can't even, like, almost too many analogies. And now what sticks, but the bicycle one that you reference is one that I always really resonated with, and we wanted to make it a theme throughout the film. Even though, to be fully frank, there's like a slight technical inaccuracy. Like, some people did apparently have objection, but the point that Tristan's making there, really, what he's drilling, like, it didn't disrupt society. It didn't disrupt, like, democracy.
Right.
And the reason why we felt good keeping it all goes full swing to the very end of the film with Steve Jobs referencing a computer as a bicycle for the mind. And this was always the thing that seemed so powerful in my mind. around what is a computer doing? It is allowing you, just like a bicycle, to go farther, to go faster, to have more capacity, and to accomplish more. I think I look back at the era of Steve Jobs around what the Apple computer and then Adobe and Final Cut and all these creative tools, like that was always for me the most exciting era of these. Wow, you can use Photoshop in this way, and look at the visuals that you can make. And so that was an analogy that just really absolutely stuck in the film for all of us, I think, really showcasing what could be a creative tool like Zoom. This is a great technology platform that we're using as a tool, right? And allows us to have this conversation across different states at the same time and share it with others. Like, that is a brilliant use of technology as a tool. And I think that's one of the big things that I just want to add in here. Like, this is not a film that's anti-technology. Like, I personally am super pro technology. I think many of the people on our team, we love technology. We love great technology. We just want the technology to be designed for the public, for society, for society's interests, not to be some manipulative, money-sucking system that exists on top of all humanity, that's sort of trading in our human experience as the currency, right? This is what these platforms have become, unfortunately, where we are, as Shoshana Zuboff says, we're the raw resource being extracted by this system of surveillance capitalism. So that I'm so thrilled that you resonated with that, because that was such a big concept for me, and I think changed the way Larissa and I work with each other, think about the software that we use, how we relate, how we talk with our whole team. When is it serving us as a tool versus when is it trying to get something out of us?
Yeah, I'm thinking about, as you just described these companies, Jeff, there's so much money and power that they hold. Let me ask you, now certainly the subjects that we see sharing their experiences and thoughts and beliefs on screen, we're willing to do that. So this is a two-part question. The first part, did it take for any of them, or maybe across the board, any convincing? Was there apprehension?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so I would love to hear about that. And then
Larissa, do you want to, or I can?
The film is out. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. What was that?
No, I wasn't sure if Larissa wanted to chime in, or I can answer that.
Please.
Yeah, easily.
I can. I won't. Larissa, go ahead. Jump right in.
Two-part question. We'll answer the first part, and then you can get to the second part.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a process trying to figure out how to get some of these individuals on camera. Some of them wanted to talk to their lawyers. I think, there's a lot of power in what a lot of them had to say, and their experiences, I think, really resonated with people, because it was the fact that they were helping build this technology. They were there at the ground floor in some cases, choosing what the business model would look like and how us as the users would be treated. And I think it is brave of many of them to be able to speak out, and at the same time, I think they felt a lot of responsibility in some cases and wanted to share their story, because it is important that we understand how these technologies work, and it is important to think through who gets to choose and who's part of those ground floor decisions. And I think for us, it was no question to try to figure out, how do we ensure that as we tell the story, we're doing justice to the individuals in the story, but more importantly, I think, to the actual issue at stake, and how each of us as individuals are being manipulated by these technologies, and for what purpose and to what end.
Yeah, that there's a poignancy in that. It's where we have to kind of almost generationally think about, hey, listen, okay, I'm of a certain age where I remember I'm nearing the end of college and Facebook is starting to make its appearance and begin its dominance, right? And I'm actually looking at a question from one of our viewers that makes me think about younger generations, which you touch on in a really pointed way to make a message clear about what's happening, especially with young women, young girls. And Josh is asking, he says, as a parent of a teen, I found the film so illuminating and important. While I'd love for our family to get off social media or dramatically rethink how we use it, there's an isolation that we're all experiencing right now in America and throughout the world because of our global pandemic. And it seems that has made these online platforms more desirable, and especially he's saying to his child and even to him, he says, and to me too, if I'm being honest. So do you have any thoughts about how the pandemic is impacting not only how we use
Yeah.
social media now, but potentially long term?
So many thoughts on that. An analogy that just came to my mind that I don't think I've actually ever used before is that social media is almost like the fast food version of a relationship. It's
Hmm.
like the cheap, unhealthy version. One of our subjects referenced it as it doesn't actually offer connection. It's connectivity, but not connection. And so if you're sitting home and you're alone and you're lonely and you're like, oh, let me go check and I'll swipe. And it stimulates the brain in a lot of different ways. And it works differently for you than it does for me, in a different feed and different content. And some people want to be on YouTube for hours. Other people want to look at Instagram for hours. But these platforms collectively have all reverse engineered all of us and figured out what's the thing that Cooper's most vulnerable to. And it knows what information, what balance of news or friends and family or visuals or headlines or, tweets or what aspect of what political debate Cooper's interested in. And it'll give you that particular feed that's going to get you to come back. And so it really is just like the French fries of the food diet, right? And and so one of the things that I like to think about is like, if I'm feeling that pull, I'm home, I'm lonely, what am I actually looking for? Am I looking to get news about the world? So instead of going to that social media feed, maybe I go to an actual news service or pick up a book, right? Or am I look right? I
Yeah.
mean, I've been reading books. So during this movie, I started to read books on paper more, and it was really hard, actually, to be like, it was really, really difficult to have the patience to sit back and read a book. And it was like this weird exercise I had to go through to like remind my brain, oh, you can do this. Like you've done this before. You like, what, right? Or are you looking, in those moments, are you looking for family connection, friend connection? Why don't you just pick up the phone that you're holding already and just call somebody or do a FaceTime or get a different level of connection with friends and family? And so that's been my process during COVID. I have stopped using social media a couple of years ago. I haven't gone back to it. And I felt the desire at times during COVID, like, oh, I wonder what's, and then just reminding myself, no, I can actually just call that person and have a meaningful conversation or have a FaceTime or a Zoom where, once again, we've paid for these products, right? We've paid for these accounts. When you get your iPhone, you get FaceTime built in, when you get whatever. And so leveraging the tools that are available for you for human connection, as opposed to, I think it, as the question poses, I mean, it's a real slippery slope, and it's really, really easy to fall back and to slide onto these platforms during this moment in time where we get this seeming sense of connection there. I am really, really concerned and fearful, however, that it is just amplifying misinformation that we've seen over the course of this year, whether it's COVID, whether it's political, whether it's just the politicizing of masks, right? And so I think that's one of the big things that we tried to talk about in the film is um, these platforms will put anybody into a filter bubble. Like, we figured out what keeps Cooper engaged. It's this particular slice of this particular conversation, and we can just keep showing more and more and more because that's how the algorithm works. And so in my mind, these platforms, if you're getting information, if you're getting your news, which the majority of Americans now get some of their news from these platforms every day,
Right.
I think it is actively leading to a less informed electorate, a less informed public, because you're getting biased, personalized information on a daily basis for years and years now.
And I think, like, for Josh, as a parent and as a teen, who has a teen, I guess I should say, I think what we learned is that we did a student screening actually of the film before the pandemic started, and then we ended up re-editing to include the pandemic. But in that student screening, we were floored by the fact that a lot of the students were saying, I know about this issue, but you've got to tell my parents to get off of Facebook or tell my grandma to get off of Facebook. Like, the kids at some point know more than the adults and recognize that they're being pulled. They have this, like, the FOMO is a real thing, and they have this fear of missing out that is controlling their social movements. And, like, in some cases, they would make a pact and say, as a group of individuals, our friends are all going to get off of social media together, because we recognize that it's not actually, as Jeff said, connecting us. It is just connectivity, and we'd rather hang out in a different way or communicate without a third party manipulating us. So I think in some senses, like, the kids might be a generation where they understand it more so than the adults do at this point.
Yeah, it's It's interesting to think about it that way, because I think a lot of times, I think now more than ever, not only is there a political split, there's a split between what people believe is true and not,
Right.
and there's a split between what people feel, what they expect from a generation, right? Gen X versus, millennials versus Gen Z. And Larissa, it's interesting to hear you put those in terms that I don't think people often think about, right? Where maybe that younger generation actually has a better handle on things than you give them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just to add to that,
Yeah.
many, some of the students, they came up to us after that screening and they were like, we get it. We're living this every day. You guys don't understand what it feels like to have to be on your entire life. Like, we remember an era before social media, and I think if you're of a certain age and you've gone through your developmental phase of life with just the normal stresses of middle school, right? And not these extra, everything you do is documented for posterity. Your entire social value, your social connection, the relationships that you have is determined by like how many people respond to the thing that you post and how quickly. And to have to feel this constant pressure to perform as a teenager, like that's a huge burden. That's a huge emotional struggle. And I don't envy Josh. I mean, it's like having kids in this era is a really, really challenging thing. One of the things I would suggest or offer is hopefully if your kid watches the film, but then also to watch it together, but to have their friends watch the movie and have those families talk together and have a pact within a friend circle about what do we want our social media relationship to look like? How do we want to engage as a family and as a community, as a pod, as a group? Because if it's really hard for one kid to get off of social on their own, because the rest of the friend circle is still on social.
Right.
So that's a huge, huge challenge.
Yeah, this actually, I've been looking at this question from one of our viewers, Sarah, and that what you just said makes me think now's the time. She asks, many of your interviewees claimed not to have realized the negative potential of their inventions.
Yeah.
And then this is a question to you, and then I want to add one little thing to it. She asks, do you believe them?
Yeah.
And then I think back, like we just said, of being a certain age, and of course I'm remembering Facebook's early moments and years. And we know the story. We know it was created by Mark Zuckerberg as essentially literally a Facebook. Let's compare, let's look at women, let's rate them. Let's hotornot.com from the early 2000s, those concepts. So that, I love what Sarah asked, do you believe the folks that you got to be in the film? Or do you think that they knew maybe there was something else to it?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I both extend a lot of empathy and a lot of skepticism based on who we're talking about, when, where, what timeline. I think that there was, in many cases, a genuine desire for positive impact. And the tools and I remember friends who worked in the industry who were like, wow, the Arab Spring, we just were able to like help like a political conversation advance because people are talking on this platform that we helped build. And that seemed extremely exciting. With some of our subjects, Jaron Lanier talked about the cycle of like a country gets on the internet. Democracy rises for a little bit as people are having more and more conversation, and then it falls as bad actors learn how to manipulate it, and the whole thing. And he referenced this pattern that we see in many countries. I think for me, the part where I have a hard time extending empathy around is like when they switched over their advertising model to an advertising model, and they started building out around, well, this is how we're going to generate revenue. Once again, it seemed really innocent at the start, but at a certain point in time, like we became the commodity, and the objective became like extracting monetary value from us, the public. And we're now at a point where I feel like there is no excuse. Like we know what these companies are doing, and I place their business model on an ethical level of fossil fuels, and we, just like, some people found fossil fuels in the ground a long time ago and was like, this is amazing, look at what it can do, and this is awesome for society. And then years later we realized, wait a second, this is having consequences and impacts, and maybe we need to do something about it. It's that same level of we created a Frankenstein, but how do we shift the system now? How do we get off of an extractive industry, whether it is the fossil fuel industry or it is extractive technology.
Yeah, Larissa, did you want to jump in
Oh,
at all?
no, I don't have much to add to that. I think when you think about the subjects and where they are in a sense of time, I agree with what you were even saying too about when this technology came out. It was really fun. It was really exciting to be able to connect with people around the world.
I
I have
loved
friends
it. Use
now
it
around
all
the
the time.
world. Instagram was really cool to be able to like, create photos and share artist communities, and even like Snapchat, get the new technology, TikTok. There's all of these like fun pieces to it and easy pieces to it. And I think the question has become, what have we lost as a result of that? What kind of relationships do we actually have now? And what kind of friends do I actually have? Jeff says this a lot, like Facebook co-opted the word friends. I have like 10,000
Mm.
friends on Facebook, but are they all really my friends? How many of them actually called me on my birthday today because I'm not on social media? I think there's really just a questioning of what kind of relationships do we want to have, and are these social media platforms the way we want to engage and interact constantly life? And I think with COVID, there are a lot of people who like their lives rely on this technology and these connections. But I do think that at this point, it feels like we need to, as a community, try to figure out different ways for us to try to connect and maintain these relationships, because it isn't sustainable. It's not, just like Jeff said, we're being a raw resource extracted, and just like climate change, it isn't something that's going to be able to continue sustainably.
Yeah,
Today's not your birthday though, right, Larissa?
No, not
I
today.
was gonna
Okay,
ask.
for a brief second, I was like, "Holy, did I just forget?" Like,
No, Jeff is a good friend. Jeff
I
wished me
was like,
happy
"Wait a
birthday.
second, this is way, yeah, yeah."
Yeah, well, but hey, Jeff is off of social media, and that's the only way
I
you
would,
know if it's
yeah.
someone's birthday anymore.
It's true.
I have like my calendar entries from friends from before social media that are still
Right.
in my address book and everything, and it's like those longtime friends whose birthdays I see regularly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Larissa used a great term there, a good hyphenate, co-opted, because I don't think I would remember my friends or even family members' birthdays. Like mom, dad, sister, okay, immediate,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but
Yeah.
like, and I love them so much, but even my cousins, aunts, uncles, they're on Facebook. I'm still on Facebook, even though I don't use it a ton. You still get that little birthday reminder, and
And it feels great,
it feels
right?
great.
Your birthday feels great on social media. You
Yep.
just get all of this affirmation, but is it real connection?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Connection versus connectivity, which you said.
Yeah.
Let me ask you just a little shifting gears. I want to ask on behalf of Alva, who's tuned in. This is kind of about your timeline as filmmakers. So let's back up a little bit. How did you make contact with the contributors and current / ex tech employees that are in the film?
Right.
Did any come and seek you out? Was there kind of a watershed moment when they realized some colleagues
Yeah.
or people
Yeah.
that I trust are involved, or
Right.
how did you convince them to take part in all those
I
kinds of
can't think of anybody reaching out to us, in large part, to be totally frank, because we were trying to keep the production somewhat hush hush.
Oh, okay.
We were not, I mean, we didn't post about it on social media, but we weren't actively, this was, we looked at this as investigative journalism at the start and wanting to understand something without kind of tipping our hand too much too early. So the real insight at the beginning was through Tristan Harris, who, as you mentioned, he's one of our main subjects, and this is where everything starts off in a fully ironic place. I first saw Tristan speak on 60 Minutes via a post that he made on Facebook. And we had known each other from college and passing, and I knew that he worked at Google. We had both worked as Apple campus reps, so I knew him through that because we loved the computers. And then I heard him speak as a Google employee criticizing the techniques that Google and other companies were using. And all of my friends in college, like so many, worked in tech, and I'd never heard this before. So that was really that first catalyst was, wait a second, so Tristan, I got to understand what you're talking about here. And then I spoke to a mutual friend that I knew worked in tech and knew Tristan well, and asked, what is he talking about? Is there something here? And that friend was like, yeah, he's really onto something. I was skeptical at first, but he's onto something. And it was through that, it was just trying to find, okay, so who else is thinking about this? Who else is talking about it like this? And so it was through that initial network that we were getting those connections. I fully want to acknowledge there are many, many people in academia in particular that have been working and studying the impacts and consequences of tech for many, many years now. That's something that we didn't know about at the time. In fact, we were just getting introduced to a lot of these subjects. And over the course of 2018, when we really started doing our interviews, we started meeting and getting connected to more and more academics. But there's a big field of people that have been criticizing or analyzing and critiquing and understanding what is technology doing to society, to our population, to kids, all of this. The asymmetric impacts on marginalized communities, and how tech impacts and affects people very differently. So there's a really powerful field of study that has been looking into this, and hopefully our film is just a contribution to the work and to the thinking and the research that's been done, and just adding more wind to those sails.
Yeah.
And there were
Larissa,
some
do you?
interviews.
Oh yeah, please.
Well, I was just going to say that, there were interviews that we unfortunately also couldn't include in the film. We did a number of interviews that ended up on the cutting room floor. We did some
Yeah.
anonymous interviews as well that we didn't end up using. So it was very much an exploratory process for us. And I think we're still learning as, new details about these platforms as we read more, we're still better understanding how this technology is actually affecting the way that we live our lives.
Um, Larissa, let me stick with you here and ask you, and then Jeff certainly follow up. Do you feel like this film being on a platform like Netflix, do you think will this not only lead to some education for the public, some realizations, but do you think that this will potentially drive filmmakers to continue to explore maybe even new ground beyond some of the areas where you have taken steps and gotten information, and do you
Yeah.
think this will be a catalyst to something else?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we feel so lucky to have had the distribution that we had with Netflix. It allowed us to be in multiple countries around the world. Just millions of people having access to this story is huge. As a independent documentary filmmaker, it is just an incredible experience to have that many people be able to watch your film. So I think for us, it was just amazing. And at the same time, I think it also allowed for us to have a shared conversation. And I think Tristan talks about this a lot in the film, that we've reached a point in our ecosystem of information that we literally are seeing two different worlds. And each one of us living in our own Truman Show, our own filter bubbles, have kind of broken down the fact that we don't have a shared truth. And I think the hope is with this film and many of the other films, as Jeff was saying, that have come out around these issues, and will probably continue to come out around these issues, are allowing us to have a shared conversation about at least something that we know is true and is happening. And then from there, maybe we can kind of wake up a little bit from the matrix, and be able to try to figure out how do we want this technology to work for us as opposed to manipulating us. And I think, as Jeff was saying, there are so many other films and topics that are similar, but slightly different to the thesis of this film. And it reminds me a lot, again, of climate change. It's something that Jeff and I spent almost 10 years of our life working in. And with climate change, there's so many issues. There's ocean acidification and agricultural runoff and, plastic pollution in the ocean. And it was trying to figure out, how do you tell the story of climate change? And it's like, we need all of the stories. We need so many more stories until people wake up to that issue. And I think this is a very similar issue. It is an existential level crisis that undermines any issue that we about.
I completely agree with everything you just said there, Larissa. I mean, this is just, as Larissa said, our past films were climate related, Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral. And because those films exist, is no reason why a gazillion other great climate movies shouldn't exist, right? There's so many different stories to tell about how our climate's changing. This is, in my mind, I feel like there are a couple of films that have come out already on tech, and there are more coming out this year. There's a great film called Coded Bias that just started in theaters a week ago. 1,000 Cuts is out this year. The Cleaners, The Great Hack. There's a small collection of films that have really been at this leading edge of this new perspective and critique of tech. And I think it's only going to grow and grow and grow in the years to come. And I think the thing to think about there is, we used to think of the tech industry as a handful of companies in Silicon Valley that made chips and made hardware, and there was just like a very limited scope of the tech industry. Now you look at the biggest companies, Apple and Google, and they're all doing, these are all separate monopolies in separate industries with separate business models. Like they, in some ways they might compete with each other, but in reality, they're in their own little silo. And we now live in an era where it's not a tech industry. All industries use technology. All industries are using algorithms. Wall Street is using algorithms all the time to do trading. Prison sentencing recommendations are coming via algorithms. Who is the college going to pick for the next class of freshmen? That's being filtered through algorithms. Technology is in our entire society now, and we have no access or transparency into, wait a second, how is that algorithm operating that's choosing those college students? And is there bias? Is there racism? That we know that to be the case, that there are many examples of algorithms that have racist data that has fed into them. So if you are working with historical data that might have a bias in it, how do we overcome the challenges we're hoping to overcome if the algorithm is literally just giving us more of the same?
Right.
And so we're now in an era where algorithms have gotten so powerful and they affect so many aspects of our daily lives, and yet we have no oversight, no transparency, and no real understanding of what it's doing to each and every one of us. That's a very new point in human history.
Yeah, it's that alone. I mean, just like you were saying about the climate, this massive thing that has so many granular pieces, any one of which could be explored in immense depth. That's certainly the case with what you look at in The Social Dilemma. And just algorithms. We could talk about just algorithms for another. How much time do we have?
Exactly. Machine learning. It's such a crazy concept. Machine learning. A computer can teach itself how to get better over time. Right. Like that is completely new. That is not just like writing a code to accomplish, to play chess. It's writing the code so that it teaches itself how to play chess. And now you can't ever beat the code anymore because it's just so much better than any one of us.
Yeah.
Well, it's all fun and games when it's like chess or Go or, one of those things. But then when it becomes your job or your mortgage or the next Oppenheimer-esque project, whose hands are we putting all of that power into, and who gets to choose?
Yeah.
Before we run out of time, I do want to ask one more question from one of our viewers, Carlos. And I think about his question in the terms of what we were just talking about and how, we talked about the subjects that are on screen, the visual effects that are used to help the animation that's used to drive these points home. One thing we haven't talked about that he is asking about is the music in the film.
Yeah.
That he feels is very effective, and I certainly agree. And he's asking, what direction, if any, did you give the composers or musicians to get the right balance of what he felt? And I think what we all felt is he uses the words engagement versus dread.
Right. That's a good framework. Our composer, Mark Crawford, just did a brilliant job with the film. And we've worked together on a number of projects. And our editor, Davis, was, at the start of an edit, you take a bunch of different music in from different sources and different inspiration and what composers have done things that sound similar. And Davis was just collecting all this stuff and putting it into some of the early scenes. And I'd sit there and be in the edit room and listen like, wait a second, where did that song come from? Oh, Mark wrote it. Oh, interesting. And then like another time, where did this song come from? Oh, Mark wrote that one too. And Mark was just supplying Davis with like ideas and thoughts and just sketches. And Davis was able to work them in a really, really powerful way. And it just became clear that he got the vibe and the tone for this film. So when we went through and we were spotting it, I felt like Mark had such a natural instinct for what is that balance? We went for this balance between analog and digital at different times and different scenes throughout the film, and this kind of shift between like the more human worlds with analog instrumentation versus more synthesized and digital to kind of provide the subconscious effect. And it was just a great process. I think Mark had this intuition as well around how we wanted to look at the whole structure of the film and when we build towards the climax, but also give relief at the end and inspiration and hope, and mapping out that emotional journey through the music. Like starting ominous was kind of the frame at different times, and how do we elevate the stakes and get people to really feel the severity and the weight of what we're talking about, and be able to navigate throughout the course of the film.
Yeah, it was beautifully effective, and I love that I did pick up on those moments where, I mean, listen, as an 80s kid and as a fan of 80s music, I love that you use those machine moments where you're using tones made by machines to drive home a message, so
yeah, it was really really powerful, I thought.
Yeah,
we had a lot of fun too, because I think he was also part of the sound production, so he was listening to some of the interviews and had a sense of what the story was, listening to all of the subjects kind of speak, and being able to kind of, from the inception, working with Jeff to think through what would that transition from a human world to a digital world look like. So I think there were analog synths in there and all sorts of 80s things that you would love.
The first thing that came to my mind is a terrible pun. I was literally going to say it struck a chord with me. So there you go.
Nice. Yeah. Well done.
Yeah, that's great. I'm fully in dad joke mode.
I'm a fan.
Just a minute ago, I was gifted a beautiful final, what will be unfortunately the final question. I mean, this is so fascinating. I wish we could continue this for hours on end. Clear your schedules, which we don't know anymore because we're off social media and who knows what anything is.
Right.
Jenna, who's been watching, is asking, and I think Jeff, you may have hinted at this a moment ago, so I'll be curious to hear you build on this. She's asking, did you end the production of the film with an opinion or feeling about how the future will play out for us as consumers? And we of course hear the potential of a civil war mentioned, which is so dark.
Yeah.
Also, unfortunately, based on what we've been seeing, not outside of the realm of possibility. Yeah. But then also there is hope. And I love that what we see during the credits is, hey, these are very intelligent human beings who have experience in tech, who are saying we can take small actionable steps to make a difference in our day-to-day life. Hey, just leave the phone outside of the bedroom, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big jump between potential civil war and, hey, let's take some action on our phones to stay away from that extreme. So what are your thoughts? What are your feelings about where we're headed in the future?
I like to say that I'm optimistic because of my pessimism. And that I feel like things are going to get worse before they get better, but that things will get better. I believe that both for climate and for tech, in that these systems in play right now are inherently unsustainable. Like we know that they can't last, but that they're also going to yield massive human pain and suffering. And I think it's just a matter of how long does it take for our society to wake up fully and say, no, we don't want this anymore. No, we want to act in better alignment with the values of a healthy, functioning society, with the idea of a long timeline in mind, and not just act on short-term, profit-driven incentives. I do think that our current state of social media and how social media and search are putting us into filters, are giving us different information, is a real scary reality. And I think that's all the more reason why Larissa and myself and our team are so committed to continuing to have this conversation and talk about it, because we need to wake up from the alternate reality that we've been living in on these platforms. One of the things I suggest to people is to do a reality swap. Like if there's that family member, or that friend, or that person that you disagree with politics about, show them your feed and look at their feed and have a conversation around how you're living in literally different digital worlds with different information being fed to you all the time.
Wow.
Let that be a point of shared conversation and shared truth about the breakdown of our shared truth. And I think we need to overcome that first step before we get to the stage of, okay, so what does meaningful legislation look like? How do we get the system back in shape? How do we repair our information ecosystem so that we get trustworthy, reliable information that we can use to make informed decisions? I believe that we will get there. It's just a matter of when and the process to do that.
I agree with Jeff. I think in the film, one of the subjects talks about the fact that the true optimists are actually the pessimists, because they believe the world can be better. And I think that optimism has inspired our team to try to figure out, well, what can we do? And I think it's really easy with a climate change or any other existential crisis like this one, to be able to feel really hopeless and helpless and say, well, I'm just one person, what can I do? But I think this in the film and even the scientists from our previous films have shown us that, you know, these are technologies that we created. We humans kind of got ourselves into this mess, which means that we have a responsibility to get ourselves out of it. And there's a lot of power in an individual, but one of the subjects at the end of the film, Justin Rosenstein, says what it's going to take is collective will. We're not going to be able to fix this problem as you said, one person logging off of social media when all of the friends are still on social media. We really need collectivity to be able to say, as a nation, as a community, as a world, what kind of technology are we going to accept, and what kind of technology are we going to say, look, that's not built for us and I'm not going to use it. And whether that's voting with your clicks or choosing what social media platforms you agree with or deciding your own kind of usage, I think there is kind of at every level, we need to do our own individual thing, and then we need to use our voices collectively to ask for change, whether that's through regulation or through the companies and their design.
Yeah,
but I think we're going to get there.
I certainly hope so. I know all of us, fingers crossed. This has just been so enlightening. I mean, certainly talking to you, but the film itself, as our producer Rachel mentioned before we started today, this conversation will live on. So hopefully for anyone watching right now, if for some reason you haven't seen The Social Dilemma yet, it's on Netflix. It's available right now. And don't DM a friend about it. Don't tweet a friend about it. Actually call your friends, call your family, FaceTime them, have a real connection and tell them about The Social Dilemma.
Yes.
You guys really created a fantastic film, and I think a really important one. So on behalf of Film Independent, thank you for taking the time, because having conversations like this adds so much to what you already have done. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.